Let's explore how Buddhist rituals could be holding you back. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. Rituals in Buddhism? The person writes, I'm curious where to learn more about Mahayana Buddhist rituals. Excuse me, let's try this again. Where to learn more about Mahayana Buddhist rituals, prayer, and devotional practices. I find that just reading the teachings of the Buddha and meditation leaves something out. There's such a difference between how Americans like myself practice and how people in more culturally Buddhist countries practice. What books or videos or websites would y'all recommend for learning about prayer and devotion? I am a Mahayana Buddhist, but I'm happy to hear about any traditions, rituals. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank the person who wrote this for their enthusiasm and their curiosity, and I want to thank them for the command of the English language. You'd be surprised, but the word nerd in me sometimes dies when I read other people's literary style, so I want to just thank this person for being able to communicate well. Forgive me if that sounds elitist, but I really, really appreciate that. So let's begin with a bit of the old broad brushstrokes, shall we? So there is a place here. So leaves something out. So let's explore that real quick. Something about bliss. Now, all complex life forms on this planet have evolved to hunger for bliss. No, that doesn't make us dirty, filthy hedonists. In fact, there is a section of our underbrain described as the dopamine-oriented reward system, which rewards with bliss, and without which we could not live. So without the drives of the dopamine-oriented reward system, we could not live. So we are wired for bliss, and that's understandable. But not all sources of bliss are created equal. I think we can agree that there's a big difference in the bliss you get from cuddling a purring kitten versus the bliss you get from black tar heroin. I think we both agree that the second is far less sustainable than the first. And so to understand Buddhism, let's jump 600 years, 700 years in the future and read something from the Christian New Testament. In the first letter to the Corinthians, 13th chapter, the author writes of love. And he infers that love is superior to devotion. And this is pretty radical, so hear me out. This is going to make sense, not in terms of theory, but in terms of example. So do bear with me. Let us talk about bovine, specifically calves. Cows are adorable, aren't they? So you look at a calf and it's devoted to its mama for two reasons. Mama's udders and mama's horns. Mama's udders keep it fed. Hey, that little calf's got to pack on almost 1,000 pounds in just a handful of months. And horns, because that little calf is relatively defensive and needs mama to defend it against predators who would think it a delicious snack. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that that calf is wired to experience profound bliss in the proximity of its mom and distress in the absence of its mom. It is wired for that. However, something magical seems to happen as it enters puberty. It no longer requires mama's udders. At last, it can eat grass. It no longer requires mama's horns. It can defend itself and even others. And neurologically, something shifts in in the skull of this adolescent bovine. No longer is it governed by a vertical devotion for its mama, but instead it shifts to a horizontal love for the herd, to protect the herd, and to pair bond with the herd, and to mate with members of the herd. So this is a universal experience amongst mammals. The shift from the vertical duality of childhood, the vertical devotion of childhood to the horizontal love of late adolescence and early adulthood. And I probably say it's not even late adolescence. It's the entry to adolescence. Remember how we shifted in 6th grade? I remember how dramatically my body chemistry seemed to shift when I was 12. Just having no more use for my parents, just being completely devoted to my peer group. Perhaps you can relate. So the author of the 13th chapter of the book of Corinthians equates vertical devotion with petulance and horizontal love with maturity. And from a developmental point of view, that makes sense. In my own experimentation upon the spiritual path, I've experimented with devotion and vertical devotion and horizontal duality. I keep saying duality. Horizontal love. And I found in my own experiments with my body and my brain that the more vertical devotion I experienced, the more petulance I experienced. Whereas the more horizontal love I experienced, the more patience and grooviness I experienced. Now, let's go back in time to the Buddha. When we read the Dhammapada, we come upon a passage that states, "Better an hour in meditation than a lifetime spent tending a sacred flame." Let us not take this literally but figuratively. The Buddha is drawing a dichotomy between meditation and ritual, and he's clearly endorsing meditation. So, when we read of the 7 enlightenment factors, we read that if we have the good fortune, have a good teacher, and we are taught meditation correctly, and we're practicing it correctly, then we should experience energy and joy and peace. And if we're not, then that's a litmus test telling us that we're not applying the teachings correctly, or more typically, that we weren't taught it correctly. Because Sturgeon's Law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. 90% of meditation teachers are terrible. Most of them are not malicious. Most of them are just lazy-minded. But the fact of the matter is, they're letting their students down. When we turn to devotion to feel bliss, it's because the way we are meditating is failing to meet a deep primal need. The response is not to repress the primal need, or to ridicule the desire to fulfill that need. The best thing to do is use the best tools to make sure those needs are met in the most sustainable way. Now let's explore something else. The fundamental duality that Buddhism seeks to transcend is the not is the tyranny. Well, the Tibetan teachers describe it as the tyranny of the duality of hope and fear. But as an American who sure does love his thesaurus, we could also use the duality of dread and desire, or push and pull. Same basic thing. So I teach from the education of my own errors. And when I first began, I really wanted to have it all. And I was hoping that I could use Buddhist magic to do that. And I found people who were eager and happy to teach me Buddhist magic. But I learned, not only theoretically, but in the laboratory of my own body and mind, that trying to get one's needs met through ritual, through magic, just strengthens the tyranny of pushing and pulling and dreading and desiring and hoping and fearing. When we read of the highest teachings in Buddhism, whether we call it sati pasadi, if you fancy Pali, or whether we call it ati yoga, if you like Sanskrit, it teaches the opposite of ritual. It teaches the opposite of manifesting it, the opposite of making it happen. One of my favorite texts that the fundamentalists hate, and that's a different topic for a different time, but the fundamentalists hate the first text on the subject of Dzogchen or Ati Yoga. And in it, we are told that whatever emotion, whether we feel peace or fear, whether we feel contentment or dissatisfaction, whatever we're feeling is just emotion. Whether we're feeling pleasure or pain, it is just sensation. Whether we are seeing beauty or ugliness, it is just a sight. Whether we are hearing harmony or discord is just a sound. Whether our meal is delicious or disgusting, it's just a taste. Whether we are smelling that which is the duality. The verbiage is. I'm blanking. Give me a moment here. Fragrant or foul, it is just a scent. So our job is not to lie to ourselves about our momentary experience, but to use a cinematic term, instead of zooming in, to zoom out. We do not do this through philosophy. We do not do this through affirmation. We do not do this through active visualization. We do not do this through believing. We do this by relying upon certain discrete mechanisms in our central nervous system that, when mastered, make life incredibly joyful and peaceful and energizing. So I'd like to share that with you right now, if I may. Let us consider the ridiculous amount of drawings I have shoved onto this page. Like grandmother stuffing a Christmas turkey, and not in the fun, tingly way. So, first, the yucky stuff. When we rely upon certain mechanisms in the front of our brain, such as the medial prefrontal cortex or the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, in the short term, according to fMRI studies, our blood mass shifts to the amygdala. This lumpy thing down here that functions as the seat of both aggression and anxiety, located in the metaphoric dungeon of our limbic system. Prolonged overuse of this prefrontal cortex can cause us to present with the symptoms of depression, which nobody wants. So whether it's rage or anxiety or despair, this is what happens from the overuse of our prefrontal cortex. Like using Waterford crystal to pound finishing nails, using the right tool for the wrong job ends in tears. However, when during our inhalation, we access our sympathetic nervous system ensconced within the thoracic region of our spinal cord, which has evolved to help us to perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. We are able to notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. Emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. From the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. Now, this can seem overwhelming, but fortunately, every time we exhale, we are already wired to access our parasympathetic nervous system, ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of that same spinal cord, as well as the tippy top of the cervical region that some of the smart kids call the I have a problem pronouncing this, please bear with me. Reticular activating system. I like to call it the brainstem because this kind of looks like a mushroom, really, doesn't it? Don't you think? Anyway, this parasympathetic nervous system is wired to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. So here is the wild thing. We have evolved over the course of our lifetime to effortlessly and automatically breathe in and out millions of times. During each inhalation, we are already wired for perception. During each exhalation, we are already wired for release. What's the problem? Why aren't we all Buddhas? Because in a caprice of evolution, our brain is kind of like Urkel. It's clever, means well, but klutzy as hell. Did I do that? So here's the wild thing. If we ask our Urkel brain to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, it'll begin cooperating with our sympathetic nervous system. If we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, this brain will begin cooperating with our parasympathetic nervous system. As a fringe benefit of that, our blood will shift from our amygdala to this thing that looks kind of like a catcher's mitt. The big kids call it the anterior cingulate gyrus. I call it the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. This is our font of sustainable, mature, feel-good emotions. I do look forward to practicing with you this morning after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day for almost every day studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. So what I'd like to do this morning is play with the latest iteration of Kind Gaze's Easy Meditation. We do not look at whether we call this couple, whether we describe this couple in the Sanskrit as Samantabhadra, Samantabhadri, Karmamundara, or in Tibetan as Kuntuzang Po, Kuntuzang Mo, Yabyum. Either way, If you have the misfortune to travel the path or traverse the path of being rigid and fearful and controlling, you will probably be drawn to the path of worship and supplication. However, if you found me on the Wild West that is the internet, then you probably are being drawn on a different path. The path of being flexible and loving and laid back. Because upon this path we would view kind gaze, mother and father, simply as an archetype whose iconography supports our practice of love and letting go. We're going to begin by bringing the crown of our head into the path of bliss and letting go, which is known by many names, such as completion stage Tantra, Bindu Mahamudra, Anu Yoga, and Tikles, Nadi Pranda, Prana Bindu, or channels, winds, and drops. Super simple. We're using a supplication as a metaphor to simply, effortlessly, and easily, and even pleasurably draw the experience of real or imagined energy to the top of our head. Please chant with me. May Lama come to this crown, may Lama come to this crown. May Lama come to this crown, may Lama come to this crown. May Lama come to this crown, may Lama come to this crown. And after that short exercise, that wasn't a ritual, that was a yogic exercise, we're now going to play with the aftermath of that. Just as after you drop a cup of sugar on the floor, the aftermath is you scooping it up. The aftermath of that exercise is us bringing whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go, known by many names, including Dzogchen, Great Completion Stage Tantra, Sutra Mahamudra Cham, Proto-Zen, Ati Yoga, Mahasandhi, or Trek shows slice through the duality of dread and desire. And we're going to use the method we discussed during the opening lesson. So come together as a team as we breathe in, and silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this. Let us watch the antics of mind as it perceives, emotes, intends, reasons, recalls, and imagines. During our exhalation, as we silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease, let us relax into mind's non-graspable nature. Some people say, dude, shouldn't I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha? To which I would say, we do not take refuge by mumbling a recitation. We take refuge by applying, by following the Buddha's example, applying the Buddha's instructions, and relying upon the Buddha's students. Anything else is a pale imitation. Is this not what the Dalai Lama taught in his book, The Path of Enlightenment? There is no need to contrive the full lotus position when the quarter lotus works just fine. Simply stacking one calf upon the other. Simply protect the crown of each ankle by twisting the foot so that it's the instep that rests upon a folded blanket or a hardwood floor and not the ankle. Take a page from any little girl who's attended ballet class and remember that the knee is simply a hinge joint and should never be forced. It is the hip that's a ball joint, but it too should not be forced. Simply assume a sustainable position and gravity will do the work for you. Let us explore the technique of counting 11 rounds upon 4 fingers and a thumb, assuming that a round is simply one inhalation followed by one exhalation. During each inhalation, we could advance the tip of our left thumb, keeping track upon the various sets of creases and tips of our fingers. Let us start with our left little finger. And now our left ring finger. And now our left middle finger. And conclude with our left index finger. So now that you've learned what I like to describe as Bengali crease counting, upon your left hand, count 16 to collect 16 rounds upon your left hand. Did you know you could use your right hand not to count rounds, but to count in sets of 16? You could count 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, or more sets of 16 rounds. You don't have to, but many people find it helpful. Every time we breathe in, whether we know it or not, we are already wired to generate a vertical traction between our tush and our crown. And every time we exhale, we're wired to release. In time, so this, we don't have to force this. We are already wired to do this. All we need to do is get out of our own way. Excuse me. Good evening, Naresh. Let us bring the four bases of mindfulness, the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental. Let us bring these four bases of mindfulness into wisdom's figurative practice of the rainbow body. Please chant with me. Rather than indulge or controlling tendencies with our bodies of active visualization, emotion, magic, and belief, we could just recite these wise words in harmony with our breathing and allow our subconscious to do the heavy lifting. Let us sidestep the rigidity that confuses metaphors for statements literal, and relax into the flexibility that savors the chance explaining metaphors as similes. Together. All visible circumstances or lots could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this body or form. We'll start with the vocabulary. We're going to use the word lot as a one-syllable synonym of circumstances. All complex animals on this planet have evolved to think symbolically. So it should come as a little surprise that we could use the verb melt as a metaphor of impermanence or the verb absorb as a metaphor of interdependence. Notice the word could. It's a very gentle word. It's not like is. So in other words, we are saying that we could notice impermanence, we could notice interdependence, and because it's gentle and not dogmatic, we will feel less visceral resistance to it. Now what I really like, because I'm a lazy bastard, is that we take all these words and then we compress them into just 6 syllables that we divide between our inhalation and our exhalation. 6 syllables where we get to viscerally explore how, although our circumstances are seen, as we relax into our exhalation, they could begin to feel less solid. All sensual bodies or forms could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this communication or speech. One of the great ironies is that we're harnessing the momentum of our own self-centeredness to transcend our selfishness. together. All resounding interpersonal speech could be as impermanent and interdependent as if it could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this mind. All lucid minds could be as impermanent and interdependent as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into our vast empty void. Like the illusion of the infinite astral sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although tantalizing to the eye, could be not graspable to the hand. So, even though our minds could clearly perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, or imagine, as we relax into our exhalation, they could begin to feel, at least momentarily, as if they were as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Again, let us return to the task of bringing whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. Let us bring our heart into the path of bliss and letting go. Lama blend with heart mind, Lama blend with heart mind. Lama blend with heart mind, Lama blend with heart mind. Lama blend with heart mind, Lama blend with heart mind. Again, let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. let us conclude this morning's practice by bringing the 4 bases of mindfulness into the practice of love and letting go. So let us begin by reviewing the meaning of the 12-syllable mantra. I invoke teachers on action, on meditation, and whom view that the Benza Tantra Guru teachers pay my enlightenment and siddhi abilities, whom may be mastered by all. May all clear minds of all beings know be as peacefully enlightened as thee. The mind of a real or imagined Buddha symbolized by a tea clay, one syllable seed or bija mantra. So we take all these words and we condense them into just 6 syllables that we silently, mentally, and passively recite during our inhalation. During our exhalation, we physically relax as best we can while striving to chant this 12-syllable mantra 4 times per breath. Om Mani Om Mahung Benzo Guru Me Maziri Hung 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 Om Mahung Benzo Guru Me Maziri Hung. May all relationships or speech of all beings know be as joyfully loving as a real or imagined Buddha symbolized by a horizontal mala mantra. Om Mahung Benzo Guru Me Maziri Hung 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 May all bodies, all forms of all beings now enjoy the beautiful health seen in Buddhist statuary, depicting the blissful body of a real or imagined Devi or Yadaman archetype of enlightenment such as Kuntu Zangpo. Om Ahum Benzo Guru Me Masiri Hung 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 Om Ahum Benzo Guru Me Masiri Hung. May all circumstances or lots of all beings now have the good fortune or boon, as a Buddha's real or imagined paradise, pure land or Vanti. Om Ahum Benzo Guru Me Masiri Hung 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 Om Benzo Om Ahum Benzo Guru Me Masiri Hung 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 Om Ahum Benzo Guru Me Masiri Hung. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 9.5 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class in group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.